My husband's a surgeon, always so wrapped up in his job that he was hardly ever home. A week before I was supposed to give birth, I found myself driving alone to the hospital where he worked. I was having the baby. I parked in the underground garage and ran toward the elevator. I was about to get in when out of nowhere, I got shoved hard from behind by his first love, Vivian Vanderbilt. One hard shove and I was on the ground, belly first. In that split second, I felt it, my blood, warm and pooling fast between my legs. The contractions shot through me so deep that my skin went pale. I gasped, begging for help, but as if she didn't see my bloody situation, she casually took out her phone and dialed my husband 50% 203617 right in front of me. Her voice was all sweet and flirty as she talked to the father of my baby. She cooed, "Marcus, I'm almost there. My finger really hurts. You think I can skip the line? Ivory won't mind, right?" I watched her step into the elevator and leave me helpless on the floor. With trembling fingers, I fumbled for my phone and called my husband, but he hung up on me 3 times. When he finally answered, there wasn't a single ounce of concern in his voice. "Didn't I tell you not to call me when I'm at work?" "Listen," Vivian cut her hand. "I'm prepping to bandage it. I don't have time for this." Just like that, he ended the call before I could even say a word. I closed my eyes, feeling myself slipping. I don't know what would have happened if it wasn't for a doctor passing by. He saw me and rushed me to the ER. Right before the operation, the doctor told me I needed a family member to sign the pre-op form. I had no choice but to call my husband again, forcing myself to stay awake, to explain what happened. I barely managed to say I'd fallen, and I needed him to sign. But before I could even get to the point, he snapped. "For Pete's sake, Ivory, stop freaking out every time Vivian's name comes up. Our baby was fine earlier, and now that I helped Vivian, something suddenly happened to you again. Come on, don't use the baby to manipulate me. I've got real emergencies to deal with. Security cameras are literally everywhere in this hospital. What do you think Vivian and I are doing? Damn it, stop being paranoid. I'm working with nerves and blood vessels. Here, one wrong move could be fatal. If you're gonna argue with me about this, I don't need to explain myself anymore. Think what you want." The blood kept pooling under me, soaking the hospital bed. Time was running out, so the doctor beside me took the phone to explain, but Marcus had already hung up. I forced a bitter smile. "I'll sign it myself," I said. "I don't have any family." The nurses around me exchanged sympathetic glances. I signed over and over, with my hand shaking, and finally, they wheeled me into surgery. The lights were harsh and blinding. That was the last thing I remembered. The next thing I knew, my belly was flat. Just a raw, stitched-up wound was left. I looked around the room, but the baby, I didn't see my baby. Where was my baby? Panicked, I tried to sit up despite the pain, until a nurse who was about to change my bandages stopped me. She must have seen the desperation in my eyes, her face full of that gentle sympathy I hated. "I'm so sorry. Your baby didn't make it." It felt like someone had ripped the earth from under me. I collapsed back on the bed and tears just poured out. I didn't even feel the pain of her changing the bandages. I'd been married to Marcus for 5 years. For 5 years, he'd put his first love first, time and time again. I used to ask him about it and we'd fight. He always said she was just like a sister. I loved him, so I believed him. I kept making excuses for why he was so cold. I thought once the baby came, he'd finally come back to me, back to our family. But in the end, his first love wrecked our home. What cut hand? What bandages? Since when does a top surgeon like him need to deal with something that minor himself? Those were all just excuses. He loved her. He always had. He'd do anything for her. And when she came back into his life, I lost him. That thought pulled a bitter smile from me. When the nurse left and shut the door, I stared at my phone. It had been 8 hours since I called my husband and my phone was silent. No single message. No missed calls. My fingers hovered over the screen, and with my one free hand, the one not hooked up to N4, I typed out what should have been said years ago. "Marcus, let's get divorced." I sent my husband the message and his phone rang back almost immediately. Before I could even get a word out, he started in on me. "What now? I checked the hospital system. You're already there, aren't you? Aren't the doctors and nurses enough to take care of you? You really had to call me when I'm at my busiest. When are you ever going to stop acting like a child? Other women don't act like this when they're pregnant, you know. Once the baby's born, what excuse will you have then? Geez, Ivory, you gotta get a grip." I was about to defend myself when I heard Vivian's pretentiously soft voice in the background, trying to calm him down. "Hey, Marcus, maybe Ivory misunderstood me. Why don't I explain it to her? I don't want you two fighting because of me. I know you're working hard and you don't have time to take care of her. I can help with that for a few days. Marcus's voice softened in a way I had never heard him use with me. No, you're still recovering yourself and you still find the energy to care about me. She's the one who's always making everything unnecessarily complicated. And just like that, he hung up again, without another word for me. My anger, my pain both felt so small against his indifference. Since I got pregnant, I never asked him for anything. I knew how busy he was, so I handled it all, taking care of myself and managing the house. And yet, there he was, tearing me down in front of the woman who had killed our baby. A bitter taste rose in my throat, my breath trembling as I tried to hold back everything building inside. Numbly, I sent him another message. I wanted to explain that I wasn't just being difficult. I wanted to tell him that I had thought long and hard about leaving, about the divorce. But when I hit send, all that came back was a red exclamation mark. My husband had blocked me. My fingers hovered over the screen, while a bitter smile pulled at the corners of my lips. Later, when the nurse came to change my bandages, I casually asked about the security cameras near the elevator in the parking lot. It turned out they'd been broken for 2 days, still not fixed. No wonder Vivian, that bitch, had the guts to act innocently in front of my baby's father. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my teeth clenched to stop the pain from the blood-soaked bandage pulling at the cut across my stomach. After half an agonizing hour, the nurse finally left. And that's when I heard my husband's voice outside the door. If you want to go see her, go ahead. I can't stand the sight of her. Every time I see her, she starts something. I'll just wait here. Then, the door creaked open, and the woman who killed my baby stepped inside. That bitch even had the nerve to smile at me. The little strip of gauze wrapped around her finger was like a silent taunt. She didn't even wait for me to confront her, she came to me first, daring to show her face. I must have looked pathetic, pale, weak, and broken in front of the woman responsible for my child's death. The grief, the anger, it rose up all at once, making my whole body shake. Before she could get any closer, I shouted, the words tearing from my throat. Did you come here to show off? To laugh at me? Get lost. I forced myself up from the bed, my hands gripping the mattress as I threw the pillow at her with everything I had. The sudden motion ripped at my wound, and blood immediately soaked through the fresh bandages. Her expression shifted instantly, and tears started spilling from her eyes as she rushed out of the room. I heard my husband's furious voice from outside. She dared to yell at you. That's it. I'm going in there and making her apologize. He stormed toward the door, already halfway inside before Vivian stopped him, her voice trembling as she cried. No, let's just go. I don't want you two fighting because of me. Her voice faded as they walked away, and I sank back onto the bed, feeling like the last bit of life had been drained from me. My husband only had to take one more step, just one, and he would have seen that I wasn't making any of this up at all, that I was actually bleeding in pain. But he didn't check on me. Instead, he walked away with his first love, not even bothering to check my records when he had the chance. The line between love and indifference had never been this painfully clear. I took a moment to steady myself, then contacted a lawyer to draft up the divorce papers and had them sent to the hospital. Marcus Hartman was the one listed to receive them. It wasn't until the courier called that I realized Marcus had already left the hospital. With my number blocked, I had to log into an alternate account just to ask where he was so he could sign. But just as I logged in, I saw he had a new update on his Facebook. It was a photo of two people clinking beer bottles in front of the beach. The bandage on one delicate hand hadn't even been removed yet, and it stung my eyes just to look at it. Meanwhile, Marcus, well, he never wore his wedding ring. The carefree happiness in the image radiated from the screen. It was evident in the caption, I can't count the times I've been thankful, turning around to find you still by my side. He said those exact words to me once. I remember that night so vividly when Vivian left Marcus to go abroad. I found him drunk, passed out on a street corner. I took him home and stayed up all night taking care of him, washing him up, and changing his clothes. He looked at me with those blurry, drunken eyes and said, I'm so glad you're here. That's how we ended up together. But that felt like a lifetime ago. Things are different now. Now I'm the burden that stands in the way of his true love. I opened our chat box, typing out a simple message. The divorce papers were sent to the hospital. You weren't there, so I had your colleague sign for them. Make sure you sign them when you get back. No sooner had I sent it than he replied with a voice message. I hesitated but played it anyway. His voice was harsh, filled with irritation. I've already taken time off work and I still can't avoid you. Just because I didn't take you for your delivery prep. Seriously, Ivory, how long are you going to drag this out? Did you really have to drag my colleagues into this shit? Are you not embarrassed enough? You were the one who cried about wanting a baby. What kind of a pregnant woman about to give birth is still getting jealous? If you won't think about yourself, at least think about the baby. You're too selfish to even be a mother." I just stood there stunned as his accusations sank in. It was unbelievable how he was turning this around on me. Just as I was about to respond, I heard her voice again, Vivian, soft and sweet, calling my husband's name. "Hey, Marcus, look at this shell. Isn't it pretty? Let's take it home as a memory. Thanks for coming with me to the beach, even with your busy schedule. This is for you." As she got closer, I heard a subtle edge of nervousness in her tone. "Oh, are you talking with Ivory?" Maybe Marcus didn't want her to know, or maybe he just didn't want me disturbing their perfect little moment. Either way, he didn't say another word to me and stopped recording right there. It was like the final blow, leaving me completely numb. I stared blankly at the screen, reopening that picture. The one where his life looked so easy, so free, so far removed from mine. That's when the nurse came in to check on me. She glanced at my phone and smiled. With a voice full of admiration, she remarked, "You still have Dr. Hartman's contact. He's really so dedicated to his patients. Most doctors wouldn't go the extra mile like that. I heard he hasn't taken a vacation in years, and now he's finally on a long break. Yeah, even our wedding was squeezed into his lunch break. There was no wedding ceremony. No one at the hospital even knows he's married." Looking back now, maybe this was how it was always meant to end. I didn't say anything. I went back to our chat box and reminded him to sign the papers, only to realize he had blocked my second account too. A scoff escaped my mouth. In the end, I stopped trying to reach him. Instead, I began looking up what legal punishment there is for causing a pregnant woman to deliver prematurely. In those 7 days I spent in the hospital, not once did Marcus bother to send me a message. I guess, to him, I was less than a stranger even though I'd once carried his child. He blocked me, and honestly, I was too tired to even care about what he was up to anymore. His mistress, on the other hand, was all over Facebook, posting pictures of their trips. Marcus didn't show his face in any of them, but he was wearing clothes I personally picked out for him. It was easy to spot him. He and this sister he talks so much about, they'd been touring city after city along the coastal route. It seemed like they were on their way back now. I couldn't help but wonder when Marcus finally sees what kind of woman his first love really is, will he still smile? As soon as the nurse informed me I could be discharged, the first thing I did was call the cops. They arrived at the hospital within half an hour. There was an investigation, evidence gathering, and searching for witnesses. The hospital's usually empty security room was packed with people, and a crowd of onlookers had gathered outside to watch the commotion. One officer mentioned that the security cameras had just been fixed that day, a bit of luck amidst the misfortune. I was finishing up my discharge papers when I ran into Vivian as I was heading downstairs. She had a lunchbox in one hand and her phone in the other, too busy sending Marcus a voice message to notice me at first. The moment she did, that playful smile of hers froze in place. She had no idea what was waiting for her when she got back. Her disdainful eyes swept over my flat belly, and her face twisted into a mocking grin. "Oh, Ivory, you're out already. So soon. But where's your baby? Why didn't you tell Marcus?" Then she faked this little moment of realization and covered her mouth like she was suddenly sorry. "He hasn't unblocked you yet. I told him to." "Hold on, let me remind him." Before she could finish, I stepped forward and slapped her right across the face. Hard enough that her earlobe tore, and the earring hit the floor. Blood started running down her neck. She screamed as her phone crashed to the floor, and the lunchbox followed, spilling food and soup everywhere. People around us froze for a second, then started pulling out their phones to record it all. The crowd grew fast, but I didn't care. "What the hell are you?" she tried to say, but I grabbed a fistful of her hair before she could finish. As she cried out in pain, tears streaming down her face, I couldn't help but laugh coldly. "It hurts, doesn't it? Can't take it, huh? Did you ever think you'd end up like this when you laid your hands on me? I'll make sure you feel exactly what I went through that day." 49 With both hands, I grabbed her head down and slammed her face against my knee. Bones cracked against bones with a nasty thud. I did it again and again, until that bitch stopped resisting, until her eyes started to glaze over. I was about to drag her to the cops myself when I heard Marcus's voice, wild with rage. "Ivory, are you out of your mind? What the hell are you doing? Stop. If you want a divorce, fine, we'll divorce. But leave Vivian out of it." The next second, he kicked me hard, sending me flying 2 meters before I hit the cold floor with a thud. Vivian rushed over to Marcus. She was sobbing like her whole world had fallen apart, and he pulled her into his arms. It was only then that he seemed to remember the baby I was carrying. His face drained of all color as he turned to look at me, his eyes falling on my flat belly. "The baby," he stammered. "Where's the baby? What happened to our baby?" I stood there, watching the shock and terror etched across Marcus's face, and a laugh slipped out of my lips, echoing in the heavy silence. "Baby? That baby has been gone for ages. That bitch, she killed him. A week ago. On that day I called for help, the very day you decided I was just being unreasonable, and so you hung up on me. That day you were busy tending to her wounds." As my words struck them, Marcus and Vivian turned pale as ghosts. Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief, his neck stiffening as he lowered his gaze. He stared at the foot he had just kicked at me, the deep unease evident in his posture. Vivian was clearly caught off guard by the revelation. She forced a smile, struggling to maintain her composure. "Ivory, what are you saying? You already got here that day, right? The records will show the baby must have been born by then, even if you wanted a divorce because you were terrified Marcus would fight you for custody. You can't act this way. After all, he's the child's biological father. Ivory, you can't be this selfish." Her words seemed to soothe Marcus a bit, and I could see the guilt lift from his face. As he let out a sigh of relief. Looking back up at me, he said, "Since the baby has been born, stop making a scene. Now, where's my son? I'll go see him. You must have calmed down a bit by now." I caught the shift in his expression and couldn't help but laugh out of anger. "Seriously? Do you trust her that much? Marcus, I'm your son's biological mother. Do you really think I'd wish him dead, huh?" My tone grew heavier with every word. "I'm telling you, my baby's gone. That woman right next to you, she killed him. While you were off having fun on your little trip with that bitch, the time to grieve for our son was already over." I took a deep sigh and said, "I've already called the cops. Didn't you notice how many officers are here today?" As my words sank in, the last color drained from Vivian's face. Before she could muster a response, Marcus jumped in to defend her. "That's impossible. Are you out of your mind? That day you called, Vivian was injured. I was right there with her the whole time. How could she have had time to hurt you? Fine. Let's say the baby's gone. Can you just accuse Vivian of this? No. The loss of that child doesn't give you the right to lash out." His voice turned serious, dripping with accusation. Vivian quickly added, "Yeah, I was with him the whole time. I only met you for the first time, when I came to see you in your room surrounding us." Onlookers continued to record the scene, their curiosity feeding the chaos. I was taken aback that Marcus could still stand by his first love after hearing the truth about our baby's death. The wreckage of my 5-year marriage hit me like a tidal wave. I didn't want to waste any more time arguing with him. I stepped closer to Vivian, grabbing her arm. "You're so sure of yourself. Let's go talk to the cops then." At that moment, I could see panic finally creeping into her expression. 60% 20-37 for 6. Her eyes darted desperately to Marcus for help, and I noticed his brow furrow in response. Without hesitation, he stepped in front of me, trying to block my way. I could feel the veins in my neck protruding as I shouted, "Get out of the fucking way. You didn't care when my baby was in trouble, and now you want to stop me from getting justice for him. You jerk. If you care for her so much, go follow her in jail." This was the first time I had ever given Marcus such a cold stare, my resolve unshaken. His face registered shock, momentarily stunned, and his grip slackened as disbelief washed over him. Seizing the moment, I pulled Vivian and dragged her from the scene. All the while, she complained about her stomach and her ears hurting. Finally, she spoke, her tone shifting to one of rare desperation. "My ear, it's bleeding too much. Can we stop for a minute so I can get bandaged? Just a moment, please." As the words left my lips, my hand struck Vivian across the face with a sharp slap. Her pale cheek immediately flared up into a fiery red mark. This time, she didn't even try to fight back. I could see the fear flickering in her eyes. I crossed my arms tightly, my voice slicing through the air like a knife. "Just a moment. I've already given you a week's grace. Did you even think about what would happen when you did what you did? Did you not realize the weight of your actions when you paraded around my room? When you took photos with my husband in the same hotel room, did it not occur to you that this day would come?" I scoffed. "Scared now? Too bad, it's too late." As we neared the security office, I grabbed her arm again. But suddenly, the expression on her face shifted. A smirk crept onto her face. "What's the point of calling the cops?" she scoffed. "The cameras have been down forever. Wanna know who told me? Your precious husband. He's the best alibi I could have. Do you honestly think he would stand by your side? Gosh, you're dreaming. No matter what I've done in the past, he's always forgiven me. This time will be no different. He doesn't care about you, and he definitely doesn't care about your kid. With the baby gone, you're even less competition. For me, you have no right to compete with me. I let you have your moment when I went abroad. Now, I'm getting back everything that was mine. I couldn't hide my surprise. I never thought she'd be so bold after all her secrets were out. The favored ones really are unbelievable. Deep down, I knew she was right from the very beginning. I never expected Marcus to take my side. But he wouldn't stand in my way as I sought revenge for my baby. The nightmare of that day played in my mind. In the next heartbeat, before Vivian could even react, I yanked her hair and pulled her forward. As I barged into the security room, I shoved her beside the officer. Disgusted, I wiped my hands, saying, "Here's suspects. Did you catch the footage?" The officer at the computer turned, his sharp gaze sweeping over Vivian's pale, swollen face. Instantly, her confidence began to fade. "We already made a copy," the officer said. "We can head back to the station now." Just as the officer stood to leave, I called out, "Just a sec, there's something else I need to see." I saved the footage of my confrontation with Vivian in the corridor. This was her confession, her own evidence against herself. Watching her face drain of color, I could see her legs trembling, losing all strength. As the police were about to escort her away, she suddenly blurted out, "I know I messed up. Can you give me another chance? Please, don't do this. If the footage gets out, I'm done for. I had no idea anything would happen to the baby. I just pushed you a little. I checked, there's no way the baby could be in danger this late in the pregnancy." Her logic had crumbled under pressure, her words tumbling out incoherently. If it was truly an accident, why would she bother to research it beforehand? This was clearly an intentional harm. Sure, she did her research, but she had no idea there was a concrete step right by the elevator in the parking lot. When she pushed me, my belly slammed against that unforgiving step. My organs were already so cramped from the pregnancy that the impact caused severe internal bleeding. If the doctor hadn't happened to pass by at the right moment, not only would I have lost my child, I could have also died. And now she thought she could brush it off with a half-hearted apology. No fucking way. She should rot in jail. My unforgiving gaze swept over her 0 for 2014 576 panicked face, and without uttering a single word, I turned to leave. Just then, Marcus stepped in. He was holding my medical records, his face a picture of gloom and loss. When Vivian saw her savior appear, a spark of hope reignited in her eyes. I thought Marcus had given up on his first love, but I was surprised at how quickly he returned. The moment his gaze landed on my face, I noticed the redness creeping into his eyes. I assumed he was about to plead for his first love, so I decided to walk past him without a word. But before I could sidestep him, he suddenly collapsed to his knees right in front of me. With a heavy hand, he slapped his own face, the sound sharp in the tense air. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling with sincerity. "I just checked the hospital records and saw your chart. That day, Ivory, why didn't you tell me? I was right below you in the office. I had no idea you were in that situation. If I had, I wouldn't have left you. I thought you were just at the hospital for checkups, and I was busy with my patients." This was the first time I had seen him lower his head before me, but my heart felt numb. I could only laugh at him. "Come on, you weren't just seeing any patient back then. You were too busy with your first love who cut in line to get treated for the small cut on her finger. Her life matters to you than my life and our baby's life. Now, get out of my way. You're wasting my time." My voice was cold and harsh. We held our ground, and he showed no sign of backing down. He straightened his back, and with every word I spoke, he hit himself harder as if that would soften my heart. F10 2032-5 In the past, I might have chosen to forgive him. But now, hatred was the only emotion that filled the space between us. All I wanted was to mock him. When he saw my lack of response, he finally stopped, his gaze rising slowly to meet mine. "Did I hurt you when I kicked you earlier? Is everything all right?" I knew he was referring to the kick he landed on me in the hospital lobby. Okay, how could I be okay? My lower back was killing me, especially since I had just undergone surgery. But that didn't concern him anymore. Without sparing him a glance, I only replied, "Get lost." Finally, he stepped aside, allowing me to pass. As Vivian was led past him by the cops, she quickly pleaded for Marcus's help to get her out of this mess. I caught him glancing at his first love, but surprisingly, he offered no words of comfort. I climbed into the police mobile, and as it ran, I noticed Marcus following closely behind in his car. When we arrived at the station, he parked and walked in. I wanted him to see his true love's true colors, so I didn't say anything to stop him. In the interrogation room, when Vivian spotted Marcus entering, she believed he was there to save her once again. She began to protest her innocence, but this time, Marcus didn't even grant her a glance. His eyes were locked onto my face, filled with guilt and regret. but there was something in his gaze I couldn't quite put my finger on. Frustration twisted in my gut as I felt my patience running thin. Just when I thought I might explode, the cops finally played the footage from the day of the incident. The clear footage was magnified and played in slow motion. I watched Vivian's eyes widen in horror as she watched the replay, her thick makeup doing little to hide her fear. Her chin trembled slightly and she mumbled in disbelief. How could this happen? That footage, it shouldn't. Vivian was halfway through her sentence, and I could see the confusion etched on her face. With a cold smirk, I stepped in to explain. Funny how the security cameras just happened to be fixed and up and running that morning, right? Just haven't released the footage yet. What a coincidence. It's like even the universe itself couldn't stand a criminal like you roaming free. I made sure to stress those last words. Vivian's face tightened, her fear so obvious that she bit down hard on her lip, drawing blood that trickled from the corner of her mouth. As the footage ended, it froze on the harrowing moment I lay bleeding, my phone call cut off, my will to survive slipping away like sand through my fingers. Marcus stood on his spot like a statue, his body tense. I could see the deepening hatred in his gaze aimed squarely at his first love. It was like he could kill her with just that look. He was itching to charge at her but was held back by the cops, his eyes bloodshot with rage. Vivian trembled under the weight of his stare, shaking her head, as if trying to deny the truth pressing in on her. Too bad for her, the attempts to defend herself crumbled under the undeniable evidence. I feigned surprise, turning to Marcus with a mocking tone. What's with that face? Not on her side anymore. She was so sure you'd protect her, claimed I was nothing compared to her and my kid. What's changed? Did you take some bad meds or something? My sarcasm dripped from my words, too obvious to miss. Marcus's face went pale for a second, the anger overshadowed by guilt. That's when the cops played the footage of me confronting Vivian in the hallway. Her defiance then seemed worlds apart from the pathetic figure she was now. When the footage ended, she slumped into the chair, completely drained like there was no more fight left in her. After a long pause, she spoke again, desperation creeping into her voice as she reached for Marcus. I swear, Marcus, I never meant for any of this to happen. Please, believe me. I didn't even see her. I was just in a rush and I bumped into her by accident. Tears streamed down her made-up face, making her look pitiful. But Marcus didn't move, leaning against the wall. His eyes were closed tight in despair. Vivian stepped closer, grasping at Marcus's shirt, as if it were a lifeline. Come on, Marcus, we've known each other forever. You know the real me. Everyone else can doubt me, but you can't join them in this. You're the only reason I've held on all these years, my one reason to keep fighting. Once she said those words, Marcus finally opened his eyes. I couldn't help but find it amusing, almost eager to see how he'd react. He didn't disappoint. In front of Vivian's hopeful gaze, Marcus shoved her to the floor, his face blank. Then, in an instant, he was on top of her, fists flying, yelling, "Yeah, you think I didn't know who you were the moment you ditched me to go abroad? Why the hell would I trust you? I was so blind, thinking you were different." The cops in the interrogation room jumped at Marcus's outburst, rushing to pull him away just as his fist connected with his first love's face. Blood gushed from Vivian's nose. It mingled with the tears that fell onto her ripped earlobe, leaving a gruesome stain on the floor. She just lay there, staring blankly at the ceiling. I could tell she was finally giving up the fight. I bet she knew at that moment Marcus wasn't standing by her side anymore. Not now. Not ever again. It felt like the cops were just trying to give Vivian a lifeline, slowing down the surveillance footage to make her excuses seem more believable. They ran it back 10 times, finally freezing the moment her hand shoved me. The dim lighting made it hard to see clearly, but when they cranked up the brightness, her wrist came into sharp focus. This time, she was silent. No way to talk her way out of it. As I walked out of the interrogation room, I spotted Marcus pacing outside, on a phone call that sounded pretty heated. He was talking to someone from the hospital, his voice a mix of urgency and frustration. What? It's online. Who's getting bullied? That's all a lie. It's just a misunderstanding, you gotta trust me. I'll be right back. He was backed into a corner, arguing at the wall. I pieced together what had happened from bits of his conversation. A video from the hospital lobby had gone viral, and since he was in his white coat, it blew up into a whole harassment situation. His boss was giving him a final ultimatum. I plopped down in a chair in the hallway and checked my phone. Sure enough, the video was already trending, sitting at the top of the charts. The comments section was a battlefield, with people picking sides. Some were mindlessly backing the innocent wife, while others were tearing apart the whole situation, claiming the original wife was getting bullied without any proof. The online fight was intense, and Marcus's identity had been dragged into the chaos. Sane folks were calling him out, saying this whole mess was his fault, that he shouldn't be turning on the two women caught in the middle. No wonder he was freaking out on the phone. Suddenly, he hung up, looking annoyed. When he noticed me, his tense brows relaxed a bit. He stepped closer, a hint of regret in his eyes. "There's some stuff at the hospital I need to handle. Can you wait for me? I'll be right back." He looked at me like if he could just take care of the hospital issues, everything would go back to normal. Just like all those times before when he'd glance back, and I'd be waiting for him. But this wasn't the past. I turned my gaze back to my phone, letting out a dry chuckle. "Do whatever you want. Whether you show up or not doesn't matter. You've already seen what you needed to see. Just make sure you're there when it's time to sign the divorce papers." The word divorce seemed to have hit him like a ton of bricks. He opened his mouth to say something, but when his eyes fell on my fingers scrolling through my screen, he fell silent. The weight of reality must have crashed down on him. I heard him let out a heavy sigh as he walked away. I glanced at him and saw his shoulders slumped. I shook my head, chuckling bitterly to myself. It was clear, his job and his first love were way more important to him than me and our baby. About half an hour later, Vivian finally wrapped up her statement. Faced with the undeniable proof, she had no other option but to plead guilty. After scrolling through the comments for a bit, I decided to ask the cops for the hallway footage. I poured out the details of that day, writing over 1,000 words, and posted everything online along with the footage. With the trending topic tag, my post shot straight to the top. The reaction was instant and explosive. Thanks to my detailed write-up, netizens found Vivian's social media accounts. They unearthed her travel videos and the times she flaunted her hospital stay like it was a badge of honor. Every post was bombarded with comments, flying in fast. "Is someone else's husband really that irresistible? Do you think he actually likes you? Gosh, free stuff isn't always a good idea. Childhood friends? More like a free ride. The original wife may look pitiful, but she's the one who's really escaping." I couldn't help but admire how ruthless the internet could be. Too bad Vivian wouldn't see this epic downfall anytime soon. In the end, to mitigate the backlash, the platform had to ban her account for good. Those who missed out had nowhere left to vent their frustrations but on the hospital's official page, where they went off on Marcus, calling the top surgeon out by his name. At first, the hospital tried to throw out a lame statement, saying they were investigating and would release the results to the public soon. But no one was buying it. The outrage only grew louder, dragging the hospital's reputation down the drain. Folks online were calling it a safe haven for cheaters and homewreckers. In the end, the hospital was forced to announce Marcus's suspension, hoping it would calm everyone down. They really thought a simple suspension was gonna cut it. But netizens saw right through that. A suspension meant he could come back. And folks weren't about to let that happen. No one wanted a creep like him back in a white coat. The flood of comments just kept coming. Their website couldn't even handle it, it crashed. That's when someone thought to call the director personally. And once that started, it spiraled out of control. I tried dialing the number myself, but his phone had already been turned off. An hour later, Marcus had no choice but to create an account and post his own resignation letter. It was his only post, but it was screenshotted and spread across every platform. Only then did the issue started to die down. Around the same time, the cops released their final report. Vivian had intentionally caused harm with no remorse and was facing up to 10 years in prison. On top of that, she owed me $50,000 in damages for medical and emotional compensation. As I stepped out of the police station with the verdict in hand, Marcus pulled up in his car, looking completely out of it. He tried to act casual, like everything was fine, offering, "Let me drive you home. I've got time now." He thought I didn't know he'd quit. I just shot him down. "Don't bother. You never drove me anywhere in the past 5 years, so why would I need a ride now that we're done? I can manage." His hand froze mid-air, and I could see the despair in his eyes. It was like, at that moment, he finally realized what he'd done over the past 5 years, ignoring the family, lying to me, treating me like an afterthought. All the neglect had completely drained me of any feeling I had left. I didn't even look at him as I hailed a cab. The only thing I left him with: "See you at the county clerk's office tomorrow. Let's get this divorce done." I didn't want to go back to our place or pack anything up. I couldn't stand looking at anything that reminded me of him. That night, I went back to my old place, the little apartment I had before we got married. It was small, but it gave me shelter. And for the first time in ages, I slept like a rock. The next day, I showed up at the county clerk's office, and there he was, standing there like a fool. He was holding a bouquet of flowers like it was some grand gesture. I took one look and sighed. "I'm allergic to flowers," I said. He looked totally confused. But 5 years ago, you weren't right. 5 years ago, when he proposed, I told him I wanted flowers. Even though I was allergic, I still wanted what every woman had. But in the end, I got nothing. And now, I didn't want anything from him anymore. I walked right past him and into the building, but he scrambled to toss the flowers aside and follow me. When I finally held the divorce certificate, I felt like I could breathe again. It was really over. Those 5 insane done years where he tried one last time, offering to drive me home, but I shut that down real quick. Don't bother contacting me again. We don't have kids, so we're done. No strings attached. Before he could get another word out, I was already in a cab. There was no way I was going back to that BOM 203560 place where I lost myself. Never seeing him again. That was my last act of mercy.